I woke up in a hospital bed with a pounding headache and a blank slate where the last 3 days of my life should have been. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. My wife, Emily, was seated beside me, holding my hand, her eyes red and puffy. I could see her lips trembling as she spoke. "You blacked out, Derek," she said, her voice cracking. "You were driving home from your work retreat, and there was an accident. I've been so worried." Her tears fell freely as she gripped my hand tighter. In that moment, all I felt was gratitude. Here she was, my wife of 7 years, standing by my side through what was undoubtedly one of the scariest moments of my life. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Thank you for being here." The next few days were a blur of doctor visits and physical therapy recommendations. My car was totaled, but miraculously, my injuries weren't life-threatening, just a few bruises, a concussion, and a sore shoulder. Emily doted on me, helping me get in and out of bed, making sure I took my meds, and handling all the calls with the insurance company. She was my rock, or so I thought, but something was off. At first, I blamed it on my concussion, but I began noticing strange behavior. Emily was glued to her phone more than usual. I'd catch her whispering during late-night calls, and when I asked who it was, she'd dismiss it with, "Just work stuff." She wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it, and when I suggested we go through the accident together, maybe check the dashcam footage to help jog my memory, she quickly brushed it off, saying, "The footage got wiped in the crash. That should have been a red flag, but I was too tired, too mentally drained to push further. Instead, I focused on recovery. But suspicion lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. A week later, when Emily left for a grocery run, I found myself sitting in my car, fidgeting with the broken dashcam. Against all odds, I managed to retrieve the memory card. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a blurry shot of headlights or the sound of the crash. But what I found turned my blood to ice. The footage wasn't just proof that Emily had lied. It was a nightmare. In the video, I wasn't alone in the car. Emily was in the passenger seat with another man. Her hand rested casually on his thigh, her head tilted toward him, laughing at something he said. And when the crash happened, the two of them panicked, their voices screaming over each other. I replayed it twice, each time feeling like my chest was caving in. This wasn't just an affair. This was betrayal of the deepest kind. She was there when it all went wrong, and instead of coming clean, she had lied to my face. I sat there for hours, staring at the tiny screen of the dashcam, trying to figure out my next move. My world was crumbling, and it was only the beginning. After watching that dashcam footage, my entire body went numb. I couldn't feel the aching shoulder or the dull throb in my head anymore. It was like my entire being had shifted into survival mode. My mind started spinning with questions. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? And why the hell did she let me take the wheel that night? Emily came home later, bags of groceries in hand, her cheerful, "I'm back," ringing through the house like nails on a chalkboard. I was still sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, the dashcam memory card burning a hole in my pocket. She dropped the bags on the counter and walked over to me, giving me a kiss on the cheek. I flinched. "Everything okay?" she asked, her brows knitting together in faux concern. I wanted to say something right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers. But a quiet, calculating part of me held back. I'd spent years trusting her, believing we were a team. And now I needed to know just how deep this betrayal ran. I forced a weak smile. "Yeah, just tired," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. She nodded, brushing it off as if I were just another chore on her to-do list, and went back to unloading the groceries. That night, I waited until she fell asleep, her breathing soft and steady beside me. I slipped out of bed, heart hammering in my chest, and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. I'd never done anything like this before, but desperate times, right? The screen lit up, locked with a passcode I didn't know. But then I saw her smartwatch charging on the dresser. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I swiped through notifications, digging for any trace of him. And there it was, a string of messages from someone named Ryan. My stomach twisted. Ryan, can't stop thinking about you. I miss your laugh. Ryan, how's he doing? Do you think he suspects anything? Ryan, we need to talk. Call me when you can. I felt sick. Every message was like a punch to the gut. But then I noticed something else. In her photos folder, there was a recently deleted file. With shaky fingers, I restored it. An audio file. My heart sank. I pressed play, and within seconds I regretted it. It was her voice, breathless and giggling, saying things I could never unhear. You're so bad, Ryan. If Derek ever found out, I don't know what I'd do. His voice followed, smug and self-assured, talking about their escapades. And then, something else. A name. Dr. Whitmore. Wait. What? Dr. Whitmore was the doctor who had been overseeing my recovery, the same guy who had so gently explained my concussion and reassured me everything would be fine. I paused the recording, my head spinning. She wasn't just sleeping with some guy named Ryan, she had been with my doctor too. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was pervasive, seeping into every corner of my life. I felt the walls closing in, my breath shallow and uneven. I couldn't stay in that bed. I couldn't stay in that house. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door. I needed air, space, something to stop the spiral in my head. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the footage, the messages, the audio file. Each piece of evidence stacked against her like bricks in a wall, locking me into a cage of betrayal. Somewhere along the way, I parked on the side of the road and just screamed. Raw, primal anger ripped out of me, filling the silence of the night. When I got back home, Emily was still asleep. I stood over her for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest. I thought about all the times I had leaned on her, trusted her, loved her. How long had she been lying to me? How much of our life had been a performance for my benefit? I wasn't sure what my next move was going to be, but one thing was certain. I wasn't letting this go. Not without answers. Not without justice. The next morning, I was already awake by the time Emily stirred. She stretched and gave me her usual sleepy smile. The same smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. Now it just made me want to puke. Morning, she said, her voice chipper. How'd you sleep? Fine, I muttered, biting back every urge to confront her right then and there. Not yet. Not until I had everything. After breakfast, I told her I needed to take a walk to clear my head. She nodded absent-mindedly, already scrolling through her phone. Once I was out of the house, I called a buddy of mine, Nick. We'd been friends since college, and if anyone could help me think straight, it was him. Nick answered on the second ring. Hey man, how are you holding up? Not great, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Can I come over? I need to talk about something. Something big. He didn't ask questions, just told me to come over. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on his couch, the dash cam memory card in one hand and my phone in the other. I laid it all out for him. The accident, the dash cam footage, the texts, the audio file. By the time I was done, Nick was pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. Jesus Christ, Derek, he finally said. This isn't just cheating. She put you in danger. She let you drive when you blacked out. She could have killed you. And the doctor, that's just Next level messed up. I know, I said, my voice hollow. But what the hell am I supposed to do now? Just throw everything away? 7 years of marriage. Nick stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression hard. She already threw it away. The second she climbed into bed with that guy, and your doctor, no less. She ended it. Now it's just about how you handle it. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the fallout. I just need to know the full story. Every lie, every detail. I can't walk away without knowing. Nick handed me a glass of water. Then you need a plan. First, get more proof. Solid, undeniable proof. Then talk to a lawyer. You need to protect yourself. If you confront her now, she'll deny everything and start covering her tracks. The logical side of me agreed, but the emotional part wanted to explode, to wake her up with a bucket of cold water and scream, "How could you do this to me?" But I knew Nick was right. This had to be airtight. Over the next few days, I played the part of the clueless, recovering husband. Emily seemed relieved, even happy, that I wasn't questioning her odd behavior. She kissed me on the cheek every morning before leaving for yoga class or lunch with friends. Every time my stomach churned at the thought of her lying so easily. Meanwhile, I set up a small web of surveillance. I installed a discreet app on her phone that synced with her messages. I placed a tiny audio recorder in her car, tucked into the seam of the passenger seat, and I dug deeper into the dashcam footage from the night of the accident, scanning for any clues that might point me toward Ryan's identity. The recorder in her car paid off first. One evening, while she was out, I listened to the latest audio file. Emily's voice came through, nervous and hurried. "We need to be careful. He's been acting strange lately. I think he might be suspicious." Another voice. Ryan's, I assumed, responded, smooth and confident. "Relax. He's not going to find out. And even if he does, what's he gonna do? You've got him wrapped around your finger." My blood boiled. Wrapped around her finger? I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to punch a hole in the wall. But then Emily said something that stopped me cold. Dr. Whitmore almost slipped up last week. He asked if Derek remembered anything about the accident while we were at the hospital. If Derek had said anything, I don't know what I would have done. There it was. Proof that she and the doctor were working together, covering their tracks. My gut twisted as the realization hit me. This wasn't just an affair. This was a conspiracy. They were manipulating me, gaslighting me, using my injuries as a shield for their lies. The next step was clear. I needed to confront Dr. Whitmore. Confronting Dr. Whitmore was a decision I made in the dead of night, lying in bed next to Emily as she scrolled through her phone. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was convinced she could hear it. But I stayed still, playing the part of the clueless husband while my mind worked overtime. The next morning, after Emily left for one of her conveniently vague appointments, I made my move. I called Dr. Whitmore's office, pretending to be a concerned patient, and asked if I could stop by for a quick follow-up. His receptionist was kind enough to squeeze me in between appointments. When I walked into the clinic, the smell of antiseptic hit me, triggering flashes of that hospital bed and the blurred faces of nurses and doctors hovering over me. Whitmore walked into the exam room a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, his face lighting up in that practiced, polished smile that doctors seem to perfect. "Derek, good to see you," he said warmly. "How are you feeling?" I stared at him for a moment, trying to gauge how deep his act went. Was this the man who had been sneaking around with my wife? The man who'd sat across from me in a hospital room, feigning concern while hiding a secret that could destroy my life? My jaw clenched. "Not great, Doc," I said, keeping my tone even. "There's been something on my mind since the accident. Something I just can't seem to remember. Whitmore set down his clipboard and gave me his full attention, his expression concerned. "That's not uncommon with concussions. Sometimes memory loss can linger. Is there something specific you're trying to recall?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Yeah, the part where my wife and her lover were sitting in the car with me. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" The blood drained from his face so fast, I thought he might faint. He opened his mouth, stammered, and then shut it again. His polished facade cracked, revealing the panic underneath. I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice shaky. "That's preposterous." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, playing the audio file I'd recorded from Emily's car. Her voice filled the room, calm but nervous. "Dr. Whitmore almost slipped up last week. He asked if Derek remembered anything about the accident. His face went pale as he heard his own name, and I saw it the moment he realized the game was up. "Derek," he started, his voice suddenly low and desperate. I can explain." "Don't," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to manipulate me like you've been doing since the accident. I know about you and Emily. I know everything." He slumped into the chair beside me, his hands trembling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. It started before the accident, but I stood up so fast the chair screeched against the floor. I don't care when it started. You let me drive that night, didn't you? You knew I wasn't okay, and you let me drive anyway." Whitmore buried his face in his hands. "We panicked. We didn't know what to do. Emily thought. She thought if you remembered, it would ruin everything." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Ruin everything? You've already ruined everything." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. My chest heaved as I tried to rein in the anger boiling inside me. Then I leaned down, getting right in his face. "You're going to tell me everything. Right now. Or I swear to God, I'll take this recording and the dashcam footage straight to the police." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. "Dashcam footage." "Yeah," I said, smirking despite the rage in my veins. "You and Emily didn't cover your tracks as well as you thought." Whitmore hesitated, and I could see the gears turning in his head. Finally, he sighed and began to speak. His voice was low, defeated. "It started about 6 months ago," he admitted. "Emily came to me for a checkup, and we connected. One thing led to another, and we started seeing each other. Then she introduced me to Ryan. My heart stopped." "Ryan?" Whitmore nodded, shame etched into his features. "He's another one of her partners. The three of us." He stopped, glancing at my face and realizing he was digging himself into an even deeper hole. "It's complicated. Complicated." That word hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just an affair. This was a web of deceit, tangled with multiple players and layers I couldn't yet untangle. My fists clenched, my breath shallow. I didn't say another word. I turned on my heel and walked out of the clinic, leaving Whitmore behind, drowning in his guilt. As I got into my car, one thought echoed in my mind. Emily wasn't just lying. She was living an entirely different life. And now it was my mission to burn it all down. When I got back home, Emily was in the kitchen making dinner, humming along to some random pop song on the radio. It was surreal. How easily she could stand there, frying chicken like she hadn't shattered my life into pieces. I stood in the doorway for a second, watching her, trying to wrap my head around the fact that this woman, my wife, my partner, had been lying to me so effortlessly. She looked up, startled. "Hey, you're back earlier than I thought," she said, flashing that disarming smile I used to love. "How was your walk?" I clenched my jaw. "Fine," I said curtly, brushing past her toward the bedroom. I couldn't stand to be near her without feeling my stomach churn. Not after what I'd just heard from Whitmore. Once inside, I locked the door, sat on the bed, and stared at my phone. My thoughts were chaotic, tumbling over one another like an avalanche. Ryan, Whitmore, the accident, the lies. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung me. It was the sheer audacity of it all. How many layers of deceit could one person construct before they collapsed under the weight of it? I started scrolling through the synced messages from her phone again. Every new text was like a blade slicing through me, but I kept going, desperate for something concrete, something that tied all these threads together. And then I found it. A message from Ryan sent just 2 days before the accident. "You're amazing. Whitmore and I couldn't stop talking about last night. I think we're all finally on the same page. You're brilliant at keeping things together. Brilliant at keeping things together." I stared at the screen, feeling the rage simmering beneath my skin. Whatever their arrangement was, whatever twisted game they were playing, I had been the pawn. But not anymore. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Emily, listening to her soft breathing, and planned my next move. If she could hide so much, then so could I. The next morning, I sent the dashcam footage, the audio recording, and screenshots of the messages to Nick. He was the only person I trusted, and I needed someone to keep a backup in case Emily caught wind of what I was doing. "You're going to blow this wide open, aren't you?" Nick asked over the phone. "Not yet," I said. "I need more. I need to know every single thing she's been hiding." Nick hesitated. "Derek, be careful. This kind of thing, it can mess with your head." "I know," I replied, "but I have to see it through." My next step was to dig into Ryan. His name was mentioned enough times in the messages that I figured he wasn't some random fling. If he was part of this, I needed to know who he was and why he mattered. It didn't take long to find him. A quick search of Emily's social media showed a handful of tagged photos from parties and outings, and sure enough, there he was, tall, smug, always standing a little too close to her. He wasn't just some guy, he was a coworker. That explained the late-night calls and her sudden need to work late over the past few months. But what I couldn't figure out was why Whitmore, a doctor, would be involved with them. The messages hinted at some kind of arrangement, but the details were murky, so I started watching her. I knew her routine when she left for yoga, when she went to the gym, when she had her girls' nights. Only now I wasn't sitting at home, trusting her. I was following her. It didn't take long to confirm what I'd suspected. One afternoon, instead of heading to the gym like she'd said, she drove to a quiet little house on the edge of town. I parked a few houses down and waited, my pulse pounding. 10 minutes later, Ryan pulled into the driveway and they walked inside together. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I wanted to kick the door down, drag them both out, and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I snapped a few photos and waited. An hour later, they left separately, and Emily went back to playing the dutiful wife. That night, I finally confronted her. We were sitting at the dinner table when I dropped my fork and stared straight at her. "Who's Ryan?" Her hand froze mid-air, a piece of broccoli speared on her fork. Her face went pale for the briefest moment before she recovered, plastering on a confused smile. "Ryan, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice low and steady. "I know about you and him. I know about Whitmore. I know about the accident." Her fork clattered onto her plate, and she sat back, crossing her arms. "I don't know what you think you know, Derek, but you're being ridiculous." I pulled out my phone and played the dashcam footage. Her face drained of color as she watched herself in the passenger seat with Ryan, her laughter echoing through the room. By the time it ended, she was shaking. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice like ice. For the first time in our marriage, Emily had no words. Emily's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, but no words came out. She looked trapped, like a cornered animal. The silence between us stretched so long, I could hear the tick of the clock in the kitchen. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching the scene unfold from above. "I'm waiting," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Her eyes darted to the phone in my hand, then back to me. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. "Don't insult me, Emily. I have the footage. I have the texts. I have the goddamn audio of you and Ryan plotting behind my back. So stop lying and tell me the truth." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. At first I thought she was crying, but when she finally looked up, her eyes were dry, angry even. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth, Derek. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. You work late, you don't listen, and I've been lonely. Ryan and it just happened." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Oh, it just happened. You don't just happen to screw a guy while your husband is unconscious in a car accident. You don't just happen to bring a doctor into it and cover it all up. What else, Emily? How long have you been lying to me?" Her jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought she might lunge at me. "You're not innocent in this, Derek," she hissed. "You've ignored me, neglected me. You've been so wrapped up in your own world that you didn't even notice I was slipping away." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. Whatever problems we had, you could have talked to me. You could have left. But no, you chose to cheat. You chose to lie." Her hands trembled as she gripped the back of her chair. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't just about sex. Ryan, he made me feel seen. And Whitmore, what about Whitmore?" I cut her off, my voice sharp. "What the hell does he have to do with this?" She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. That moment of silence told me more than any words could. There was more to the story, something bigger than I'd even imagined. I slammed my fist on the table again, making her jump. "Tell me the truth, Emily. All of it. Now." Her eyes darted to the door, like she was contemplating running. But then she took a deep breath and spoke. "Ryan introduced me to Whitmore," she said, her voice trembling. "It started as just an affair. But then Whitmore got involved. He's not just a doctor. He helps people like Ryan and me cover things up. He's been doing it for years." I froze, her words sinking in like a stone in water. "Cover things up? What the hell are you talking about?" She buried her face in her hands again. "Whitmore has connections. He makes problems disappear. He knew how to keep you from remembering the accident. He knew how to..." My stomach churned, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "He knew how to what, Emily? Say it." She looked up at me, her face pale. "He gave me something," she whispered. "Something to put in your drink the night of the accident. To make sure you wouldn't remember." The room spun around me, and I had to grip the table to steady myself. "You drugged me?" I asked, my voice low and deadly. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "It was Ryan's idea. He said it was the only way to protect us." I stood up so fast the chair toppled over behind me. My vision blurred with rage as I stared down at her, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. She wasn't just a liar or a cheat. She was a manipulator, a coward, and now a criminal. "You're unbelievable," I spat, my voice shaking. You've been lying to my face, risking my life. And for what? For some cheap thrill with Ryan? For what, Emily?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, sobbing into her hands, as if she were the victim in all of this. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, the dash cam, and my keys, and I walked out the door without looking back. Later that night, I sat in Nick's living room, staring blankly at the wall while he poured us both a drink. I told him everything, and for once, he didn't have any advice, just quiet solidarity. "What are you going to do?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. I stared into my glass, the whiskey burning my throat as I swallowed. "I'm going to burn it all down," I said. "Every lie, every secret. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Emily and her little crew really are.